in the heart of a bustling city, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and luxury cars lined the streets. There lived a boy named Ethan. He wasn't like the other children you'd see walking to school with backpacks or playing in parks. Instead, he spent his days rummaging through trash bins for scraps of food, his clothes tattered and his shoes held together by frayed strings. Life had been cruel to him, but despite everything, Ethan carried a spark in his eyes, a quiet resilience that refused to dim. What no one knew was that this seemingly ordinary boy was about to cross paths with someone who would change his life forever. And what she discovered after following him home, well, let's just say it left her shaken to her core. It all began on a rainy afternoon when the city seemed drenched in melancholy. Victoria Langston, one of the wealthiest women in the country, stepped out of her chauffeur-driven car clutching an umbrella. She rarely ventured into these parts of town. Her world revolved around board meetings, charity galas, and penthouse views. But today was different. Today, someone caught her attention as she walked past a crowded marketplace. It was Ethan, standing barefoot under a leaking awning, trying to shield himself from the rain while carefully cradling a small loaf of bread in his hands. His face lit up momentarily when he realized the bread wasn't completely soaked, but then his expression turned somber, almost guilty, as if he felt undeserving of even this tiny victory. That look struck Victoria deep inside, awakening a part of her she thought she'd buried long ago. Victoria hesitated for a moment, unsure of what compelled her to approach him. Maybe it was the way Ethan clutched that piece of bread like it was gold, or maybe it was the stark contrast between his reality and hers. Whatever it was, she found herself kneeling beside him, offering him a warm smile and asking softly, "Are you okay?" Ethan looked at her warily, his eyes darting between her and the expensive watch on her wrist. For a second, he didn't respond, as though weighing whether this stranger could be trusted. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm fine," he said, though his trembling lips told another story. Something about his demeanor tugged at Victoria's heartstrings, and before she knew it, she handed him a crisp $100 bill. Ethan stared at the money in disbelief, shaking his head vigorously. "No, I can't take this," he murmured, pushing the bill back toward her. Victoria raised an eyebrow, surprised by his refusal. Most people in his situation wouldn't have hesitated. "Why not?" she asked gently. Ethan glanced away, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Because I don't want charity," he replied, his voice steadier now. "I work hard for what I get." Those words hit Victoria like a punch to the gut. Here was a child, barely 10 years old, talking about dignity and self-worth, while living in unimaginable poverty. It was humbling, to say the least. Determined to understand more, Victoria decided to follow Ethan after their brief encounter. She told herself it was curiosity driving her, but deep down, she knew it was something more profound. As Ethan navigated the labyrinthine alleys of the city, dodging puddles and avoiding suspicious glances from passersby, Victoria trailed behind at a distance, careful not to startle him. The farther they went, the grimmer the surroundings became. The shiny storefronts gave way to crumbling buildings, and the aroma of fresh coffee was replaced by the stench of decay. Finally, Ethan stopped in front of a dilapidated structure that leaned precariously to one side, its windows boarded up and its walls covered in graffiti. This, apparently, was where he called home. Victoria watched as Ethan slipped inside, her mind racing with questions. Who was waiting for him there? Did he have family? Was he safe? Her billionaire instincts screamed at her to intervene, to whisk him away from this place, and provide him with a better life. But something held her back, a respect for his autonomy, perhaps, or a desire to learn more before making any rash decisions. So instead of barging in, she waited outside, her heart pounding with anticipation. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last, until she heard voices drifting from within the building. They were faint but unmistakably filled with emotion, laughter, tears, and snippets of conversation that hinted at a story far deeper than she had imagined. Unable to resist any longer, Victoria crept closer, peering through a crack in the doorframe. What she saw inside stopped her cold. There, amidst piles of old newspapers and threadbare blankets, sat Ethan, and surrounding him were 3 younger children, their faces glowing with joy as they shared the loaf of bread he had salvaged earlier. It dawned on Victoria then, Ethan wasn't just surviving for himself, he was taking care of others, sacrificing his own needs to ensure theirs were met. Tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the magnitude of his sacrifice. How many nights had he gone hungry so these kids could eat? How many times had he braved the harsh elements to keep them safe? But just as Victoria thought she understood the depth of Ethan's struggles, she noticed something else. A photograph pinned to the wall, yellowed with age and torn at the edges. In it stood a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Ethan, her arms wrapped protectively around the same group of children. Victoria's breath hitched. Could this be Ethan's mother? If so, where was she now? Why weren't social services involved? A million questions swirled in her mind, each one more urgent than the last. She wanted answers, but she also feared what those answers might reveal. Because if there was one thing Victoria had learned over the years, it was that the truth often came with consequences too heavy to bear. As the evening shadows grew longer, Victoria made a decision. She couldn't walk away, not yet. Not without knowing the full extent of Ethan's story. Summoning every ounce of courage, she knocked lightly on the door, her heart hammering against her chest. For a moment, silence reigned. Then footsteps approached, slow and cautious, until the door creaked open to reveal Ethan's wary face once again. His eyes widened in recognition, but instead of fear, there was a flicker of hope, a fragile, fleeting thing that made Victoria's resolve solidify. "Can we talk?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with emotion. Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the children huddled together behind him. Finally, he nodded, stepping aside to let her in. What happened next changed Victoria's perspective in ways she never anticipated. Sitting cross-legged on the cold, hard floor, surrounded by the very embodiment of resilience and love, she listened as Ethan recounted his tale, a story of loss, survival, and unwavering determination. By the time he finished speaking, Victoria's vision was blurred with tears, and her mind was ablaze with possibilities. She knew she couldn't fix everything overnight, but she also knew she couldn't turn her back on this family. Little did she realize, however, that her involvement would uncover secrets darker and more complex than she ever imagined. Secrets that would force her to confront not only the harsh realities of the world, but also the limitations of her own power. And as the night wore on, one question lingered in the air, unanswered and haunting. What would happen next? As Victoria sat there, absorbing every word Ethan shared, she began to piece together the fragments of his life. His mother, the woman in the photograph, had passed away 2 years ago after a prolonged illness. With no relatives to turn to, and no safety net to fall back on, Ethan had taken it upon himself to care for his younger siblings Leela, Mia, and Jake. Their father had left long before any of them could remember, leaving behind only unanswered questions and a gaping void. What struck Victoria most was how Ethan spoke of his mother not with bitterness or regret, but with profound love and admiration. "She taught me everything," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "How to be strong, how to take care of others, how to keep going even when it feels impossible." The weight of responsibility resting on Ethan's shoulders became painfully clear as he described their daily routine. Every morning, he woke up before sunrise to scavenge for food and odd jobs around the neighborhood. Some days, he earned enough to buy a loaf of bread or a carton of milk. Other days, they went hungry. Despite the hardships, Ethan never faltered in his commitment to his siblings. He made sure they stayed clean, helped them practice reading, using old books he found in dumpsters, and tucked them into bed each night with stories of brighter tomorrows. It was a level of maturity and selflessness that seemed almost superhuman, especially coming from someone so young. But as Victoria listened, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story, something Ethan wasn't saying. She pressed gently, asking about school and whether anyone had noticed their situation. Ethan hesitated, his gaze dropping to the floor. "We don't go to school anymore," he admitted reluctantly. "There's no one to watch them while I work, and besides," his voice trailed off, but the unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. They didn't belong in a world where uniforms were required and lunches came in lunchboxes, instead of plastic bags scavenged from trash bins. Victoria's mind raced. The system had failed these children spectacularly. How could 4 kids slip through the cracks like this? Where were the social workers, the neighbors, the community programs designed to help families in need? Her billionaire instincts kicked in again, urging her to act, to call her lawyers, set up trust funds, buy them a house, but she forced herself to pause. This wasn't just about solving problems with money. It was about understanding the root causes and addressing them thoughtfully. Still, the urgency gnawed at her. Time was running out for Ethan and his siblings, and she knew it. The next day, Victoria returned with supplies, a backpack filled with clothes, notebooks, and snacks, along with prepaid debit cards for groceries. She expected gratitude, maybe even relief, but what she got was resistance. "I told you, I don't want charity," Ethan snapped, his usually calm demeanor cracking under the pressure. "If you really want to help, teach us how to stand on our own." His words stung, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. Victoria realized then that her initial approach had been flawed. She'd been treating the symptoms without considering the cure. Determined to do better, Victoria started visiting regularly, not as a savior but as an ally. She brought books and spent hours teaching the kids basic math and reading skills. She introduced them to art by sketching pictures with colored pencils, sparking joy in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Slowly but surely, she earned their trust, and they began opening up about their fears and dreams. Lila wanted to be a teacher, Mia dreamed of becoming a dancer, and Jake, the youngest, simply wished for a home where he didn't have to hear the walls creak ominously at night. Each revelation deepened Victoria's resolve to change their lives for the better. Yet, amidst the progress, shadows loomed. One evening, as Victoria packed up to leave, she overheard a conversation between Ethan and an older boy who had stopped by. The stranger's tone was sharp, demanding. "You owe us rent, kid," he growled. 3 months' worth. Either pay up or find somewhere else to squat. Ethan's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides. "We'll figure it out," he muttered, though his voice wavered. When the boy finally left, slamming the door behind him, Victoria confronted Ethan. "Rent?" she asked, her stomach twisting with dread. "Who was that?" Ethan sighed, defeated. "It's complicated," he said. "This place isn't exactly legal. The guy who owns it lets people stay here if they can pay. We've been cutting it close," but he didn't finish the sentence. But he didn't need to. Victoria understood. They were living on borrowed time, and the clock was ticking faster than ever. The stakes escalated when Victoria discovered that the building was slated for demolition. A developer had bought the property, planning to turn it into luxury condos. Notices had already been posted, giving tenants less than a month to vacate. Panic surged within her. Without a place to live, Ethan and his siblings would end up on the streets, exposed and vulnerable. She scrambled to come up with solutions, reaching out to contacts in real estate and government agencies. But bureaucracy moved at a glacial pace. Meanwhile, the landlord's enforcer, the same boy who had threatened Ethan, grew increasingly aggressive, making veiled threats about what might happen if they didn't comply. Tensions reached a breaking point one stormy night. As thunder rolled overhead, Victoria rushed to the building, fearing the worst. When she arrived, she found Ethan standing outside, soaked to the bone, his face pale with fear. Inside, chaos reigned. The older boy and 2 accomplices were ransacking the tiny apartment, tossing belongings onto the floor and shouting obscenities. Lila clung to Mia, tears streaming down their faces, while Jake hid behind a pile of blankets. Ethan lunged forward, trying to stop them, but he was no match for their strength. That's when Victoria stepped in, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "Get out," she commanded, her authority undeniable. For a moment, everyone froze, stunned by her presence. Then, begrudgingly, the intruders backed off, muttering curses as they disappeared into the rain. Breathing heavily, Victoria turned to Ethan, who looked at her with a mixture of gratitude and shame. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I tried to protect them, but—" His voice broke, and for the first time, he allowed himself to cry. Victoria pulled him into a hug, holding him tightly as the storm raged on outside. In that moment, she realized the battle wasn't just against poverty or injustice, it was against despair itself. And winning that battle meant doing whatever it took to give these children hope. With renewed determination, Victoria vowed to fight for Ethan and his siblings, not just as a benefactor, but as a partner in their journey toward a better future. But as dawn broke over the city skyline, casting golden light onto the crumbling building, one question remained unanswered. Could she succeed in time to save them from losing everything? The climax of the story loomed ahead, fraught with uncertainty and peril, leaving both Victoria and the audience holding their breath. As the sun rose higher in the sky, Victoria sprang into action. She knew time was running out, and every second counted. With her phone in hand, she made call after call, pulling strings and leveraging her influence to secure temporary housing for Ethan and his siblings. Her team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, navigating red tape and negotiating with local authorities to expedite the process. It wasn't easy. There were moments when it felt like the walls were closing in, but Victoria refused to give up. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about stock prices or boardroom strategies. Her sole focus was on these 4 children who had captured her heart. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. A friend of hers owned a small apartment complex reserved for low-income families, and after hearing Ethan's story, he agreed to provide them with a fully furnished unit on short notice. Relief washed over Victoria as she relayed the news to Ethan later that evening. His eyes widened with disbelief, and for a moment he simply stared at her, searching for any sign of insincerity. "You're serious?" he asked, his voice trembling. Victoria nodded firmly. "I promise," she said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "This isn't charities, a fresh start." Moving day arrived amidst a flurry of activity. Volunteers from a local nonprofit helped pack their meager belongings, while neighbors who had previously turned a blind eye pitched in to clean the new apartment. Ethan watched everything unfold with a mix of awe and apprehension, still unsure if this miracle was real. When they finally stepped inside their new home, a cozy 2-bedroom space with soft carpeting and freshly painted walls, the younger kids erupted into cheers. Lila twirled around the living room, Mia hugged the stuffed animals someone had donated, and Jake ran straight to the window, marveling at the view of trees instead of crumbling brick. Ethan, however, remained quiet, his emotions locked away as he processed the enormity of what had happened. Victoria stayed close, sensing his hesitation. "It's okay to feel overwhelmed," she told him gently. "But remember, you've already done the hardest part. You kept your family together." Her words seemed to break through his defenses, and for the first time, he let himself smile, a genuine, radiant smile that lit up the room. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely audible but filled with gratitude, "for everything." With the immediate crisis averted, Victoria turned her attention to long-term solutions. She enrolled the kids in school, ensuring they received the education they deserved. She set up a scholarship fund in their mother's name, designed to support not only Ethan and his siblings but also other children facing similar challenges. And perhaps most importantly, she became a mentor to Ethan, teaching him the skills he needed to navigate adulthood while encouraging him to dream bigger than survival. Over time, their bond grew stronger, transforming from one of benefactor and beneficiary into something resembling family. Months passed, and life began to stabilize for the siblings. They thrived in their new environment, their laughter echoing through the halls of their building. Neighbors noticed the change too, often commenting on how polite and hard-working the kids were. Ethan, in particular, earned respect for juggling schoolwork with a part-time job at a nearby cafe. He never forgot where he came from, though, and made it a point to give back whenever he could, whether by volunteering at food banks or mentoring younger children in his community. One day, as Victoria visited their apartment for dinner, she found herself reflecting on how far they'd come. The table was set with mismatched plates and silverware, but the meal spaghetti, cooked by Ethan himself, was delicious. As they ate, Lila excitedly showed off her latest report card, beaming with pride at the A+ she'd earned in math. Mia talked animatedly about an upcoming dance recital, and Jake proudly displayed a drawing he'd made of their new home. Ethan listened intently, occasionally chiming in with advice or encouragement, his role as a protector now complemented by warmth and joy. Looking around the table, Victoria realized she had gained as much from this journey as she had given. These children had reminded her of the power of resilience, love, and hope. They had taught her that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in the connections we forge and the lives we touch. In helping them, she had rediscovered parts of herself she thought she'd lost: her compassion, her humanity, her purpose. As the evening drew to a close, Ethan walked Victoria to the door. "I don't know how to repay you," he said softly, his gaze steady. Victoria smiled, shaking her head. "You already have," she replied, "by showing me what really matters." With that, she hugged him tightly before stepping out into the night, leaving behind a legacy of kindness that would ripple through generations. And so, the story of Ethan and Victoria became more than just a tale of survival. It became a testament to the transformative power of empathy and action. It reminded us all that even in our darkest moments, there is light waiting to be found, and sometimes, all it takes is one person willing to extend a hand to change the course of a life forever.